The blood on Colonel Sarah Mitchell's hands wasn't from her patients this time, was her own. Standing in the bathroom of Walter Reed Military Medical Center, she stared at the shattered mirror, her knuckles bleeding from the impact. At 53, after 28 years of distinguished service, she had just been told she was too old, too rigid, and too female to continue leading the trauma unit. The 3-star general who delivered the news hadn't even looked her in the eye. Tomorrow, they would announce her voluntary transfer to medical records, a career death sentence for someone who had saved over 1,000 lives in combat zones across 3 continents. But Sarah Mitchell had survived worse, much worse. The morning of October 15, 2024, began like any other at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. Colonel Sarah Mitchell arrived at 050 hours, her uniform pressed to perfection, her graying hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn since her days as a young lieutenant in Operation Desert Storm. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the military hospital as she made her rounds, checking on the young soldiers recovering from training accidents and overseas deployments. Morning. Colonel Mitchell, Private First Class Jackson, greeted her from his bed, attempting a salute despite his bandaged shoulder. "At ease, soldier," Sarah said gently, adjusting his IV drip with practiced hands. "How's the pain today?" "Better, ma'am. Thanks to you." Sarah offered a small smile. It was exchanges like these that reminded her why she'd chosen this path. Not for the recognition, not for the rank, but for moments when she could make a difference in a young soldier's life. "Colonel Mitchell, to the commander's office." Immediately, the intercom's harsh voice cut through the morning quiet. Sarah's stomach tightened. Immediate summons were rarely good news. She handed Jackson's chart to Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, one of the newer nurses under her command. "Continue rounds, Lieutenant. Check his drainage tubes in an hour." "Yes, ma'am." The walk to Major General Harrison's office felt longer than usual. Sarah had known Harrison for 15 years, had served under him in Afghanistan. He was a hard man, but fair, or so she'd thought. His secretary, Master Sergeant Williams, wouldn't meet her eyes as she announced her arrival. Another bad sign. "Send her in." Harrison's voice boomed from behind the heavy oak door. Sarah entered to find she wasn't alone. 3 other officers sat around Harrison's desk: Brigadier General Patricia Lawson from Human Resources, Colonel Michael Reeves from Hospital Administration, and a civilian she didn't recognize, a young woman in an expensive suit who looked like she'd stepped out of a Pentagon PowerPoint presentation. "Sit down, Mitchell," Harrison said without preamble. No Sarah, no acknowledgement of their years of service together. She sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap. "Sir, I'll get straight to the point," Harrison began, shuffling papers he wasn't really reading. "There have been concerns raised about your leadership style and your ability to adapt to modern military medicine." Sarah's jaw tightened. "What concerns, sir?" The civilian woman leaned forward. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen, consultant for Military Medical Modernization Initiative. We've been reviewing performance metrics across all military medical facilities, and frankly, Colonel, your unit is problematic." "Problematic?" Sarah kept her voice level. "My trauma unit has a 97% survival rate. We've pioneered new techniques for treating blast injuries. My nurses are terrified of you." Dr. Chen interrupted. "We've received multiple complaints about your harsh training methods, your resistance to new protocols, and your traditional approach to military hierarchy." Sarah felt heat rising in her chest. "My traditional approach has saved lives. When you're in a combat zone, there's no time for hand-holding or participation trophies." General Lawson cleared her throat. "Colonel Mitchell, times have changed. The military has changed. We need leaders who can embrace diversity, technology, and modern management techniques." "I've embraced plenty," Sarah shot back. "I was one of the first female combat nurses. I've trained soldiers of every background. I've adapted to new medical technologies for 3 decades. But you haven't adapted your leadership style." Harrison finally looked at her. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but we're reassigning you." The words hit like shrapnel. "Reassigning me? Where?" "Medical Records Division. Same rank, same pay." It's not a demotion, but it was. They all knew it was. Medical records was where careers went to die, where decorated officers counted days until retirement, filing papers instead of saving lives. "Is this because of my age?" Sarah asked quietly. "Or because I'm not the right kind of woman for your modern military?" The room fell silent. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This is about performance and adaptability, Harrison said stiffly. The decision is final. You'll transition your duties over the next 2 weeks. Sarah stood, her legs feeling wooden. 28 years, 3 wars, countless lives saved. And it ended like this, in a sterile office with people who'd never heard a soldier's last words or held pressure on a bleeding wound until help arrived. Will that be all, sir? That's all, Colonel. She saluted perfectly, as always, and left. The bathroom mirror reflected a face Sarah barely recognized. When had those lines gotten so deep? When had her green eyes lost their spark? She was examining her reflection when she heard voices from the hallway. Did you hear? The Ice Queen finally got taken down. It was Captain Amanda Foster, one of the younger doctors. About time, another voice responded. She made my residency hell. Always going on about back in my day and real combat medicine, like we're not real soldiers because we didn't serve in Iraq. I heard Chen tore her apart in there. Said she had complaints from half the nursing staff. Half. Try all of them. Nobody likes working for Mitchell. She's a fossil. Sarah's fist connected with the mirror before she realized she'd moved. The glass splintered, reflecting her face in a dozen broken pieces. Pain shot through her hand, and she watched with detached fascination as blood welled from her knuckles. The door burst open. Lieutenant Hayes stood there, eyes wide. Colonel, your hand, it's nothing, Sarah said automatically, reaching for paper towels. Let me help, I said. It's nothing, Lieutenant. The words came out harsher than intended, and Hayes flinched. This was why they complained. Sarah realized this was what they meant. But how else was she supposed to be? The military had shaped her, molded her into something hard and sharp, and now they were punishing her for it. I'm sorry, Sarah said quietly. I'll take care of it. Hayes hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Colonel, what happened in the commander's office? Everyone's talking. I've been reassigned. Medical records. Sarah wrapped paper towels around her bleeding hand. Effective in 2 weeks. That's wrong. You're the best trauma nurse this hospital has ever had. Sarah laughed bitterly. Apparently, being the best isn't enough anymore. You need to be likable, soft, modern. You've never been soft, Hayes said carefully. But you taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 4 years of nursing school. When Private Martinez coded last month, you didn't give up. 45 minutes of CPR. Anyone else would have called it. And what did I tell you during those 45 minutes? Hayes smiled slightly. Death is the enemy. Lieutenant, we don't negotiate with the enemy. They think that makes me inflexible. A dinosaur. Sarah flexed her injured hand, wincing at the pain. Maybe they're right. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted. They're idiots. Hayes's young face was fierce. And if they can't see your value, that's their loss. But ma'am, maybe this doesn't have to be the end. Sarah looked at the young lieutenant. Hispanic, first-generation college graduate, enlisted at 18, and worked her way to a commission. The kind of soldier Sarah had always fought to protect and promote. What do you mean? I mean, you have 2 weeks. A lot can happen in 2 weeks. Sarah tried to go about her duties normally the next day, but word had spread. Some looked at her with pity, others with a satisfaction that made her stomach turn. She was reviewing patient charts when Master Sergeant Williams appeared at her office door. Colonel, you have visitors. Sarah looked up to find a group of people crowding her small office. Not just any people, Saul shows, some in wheelchairs, others on crutches, a few standing tall despite visible scars. She recognized many of them, former patients from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. What is this? She asked. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson rolled forward in his wheelchair. Sarah remembered him 19 years old when an IED took both his legs in Kandahar. She'd been the one to stabilize him, to whisper that he'd dance at his wedding someday, even if the dancing looked different than he'd imagined. This, Colonel, is a problem, Thompson said. We heard what they're doing to you. Behind him, Technical Sergeant Lisa Park nodded. She'd been badly burned in a fuel convoy attack. Sarah had spent hours debriding her wounds, telling her stories to distract from the pain. How did you all? Social media, ma'am, Park said. One post about what's happening to you went viral in the veteran community. We've been organizing. Organizing for what? To fight back, Thompson said simply. You saved our lives. Time we returned the favor. Sarah felt tears threatening another weakness the brass would probably cite. I appreciate the sentiment, but no buts, Colonel. interrupted Captain James Rodriguez, standing on a prosthetic leg. Do you know how many of us are out here? How many soldiers you've saved, trained, mentored? We've got a petition with over 10,000 signatures already. We've got senators asking questions. We've got media outlets wanting the story. Media? Sarah shook her head. No, I won't turn this into a circus. It already is a circus, Thompson said. They're pushing out a decorated colonel because she's too tough, because she holds people to high standards. That's not the military I signed up for. The military you signed up for doesn't exist anymore, Sarah said quietly. Then maybe it's time to remind them what it should be, Park said. Over the next days, Sarah watched in amazement as her former patients mobilized. They shared stories on social media, not just about medical treatment, but about the colonel who stayed by their bedsides, who fought insurance companies for their benefits, who showed up at their weddings and their children's births. Hashtag Save Colonel Mitchell started trending. Local news picked up the story. Then national outlets. The narrative was compelling. Decorated female officer, pushed out for being too tough in an era of softening standards. General Harrison summoned her again. What the hell is this, Mitchell? He threw a tablet on his desk, showing a CNN headline. Decorated combat nurse forced out. Is military medicine too soft? I didn't start this, sir. Well, you need to end it. Call off your dogs. They're not my dogs, sir. They're United States veterans exercising their First Amendment rights. Harrison's face was purple. This is insubordination. No, sir. Insubordination would be if I refused the reassignment. I haven't. I've continued my duties and prepared for the transition, as ordered. You know what this is doing to the hospital's reputation. Sarah stood. With respect, sir, what's damaging to the hospital's reputation is losing experienced personnel, because they don't fit someone's idea of modern leadership. My methods may be old school, but my results speak for themselves. Your results include the highest survival rate in the trauma unit's history, the most successful training program for combat nurses, the lowest infection rates, but apparently none of that matters if some people think I'm mean. The Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Military Personnel wasn't supposed to be discussing Colonel Sarah Mitchell. They were supposed to be reviewing budget allocations for military medical facilities. But Senator Elizabeth Warren had other ideas. Before we discuss budgets, Warren said, adjusting her glasses, I'd like to address a concerning trend in our military medical corps, the forced reassignment of experienced personnel, particularly women, under the guise of modernization. Sarah watched from the gallery, in civilian clothes for the first time in years. Hayes sat beside her, along with Thompson and a dozen other veterans. We have submitted for the record, Warren continued, the service history of Colonel Sarah Mitchell. 28 years of distinguished service, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit, and next week, she's being transferred to medical records because someone thinks she's too strict. General Lawson shifted in her witness chair. Senator, personnel decisions are made based on multiple factors, including age, gender, the fact that Colonel Mitchell doesn't coddle people. We prefer to say she lacks adaptive leadership skills. Warren leaned forward. General, how many lives has Colonel Mitchell saved? I don't have that specific. I do. 1,237 documented saves. That's not counting the assists, the trainings, the innovations she's introduced. Now, how many lives have been saved by the consultant who recommended her reassignment? Lawson was quiet. I'd also like to submit for the record, Warren continued, 15 testimonials from soldiers whose lives Colonel Mitchell saved. Would you like me to read them? That won't be necessary. I think it is. Warren opened a folder. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson writes, Colonel Mitchell held my hand for 6 hours while they tried to save my legs. When they couldn't, she was the one who told me I'd still be whole. She visited me every day for months, pushed me through rehab, came to my wedding. She's not soft, but she's everything a soldier needs. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Hayes quietly handed her a tissue. Warren continued reading, story after story. Soldiers who credited Sarah not just with saving their lives, but with giving them reason to keep living. So I ask you, General Lawson, Warren concluded, what message does it send when we sideline officers like Colonel Mitchell? That experience doesn't matter. That saving lives isn't enough if you don't do it with a smile. The hearing continued for 2 more hours. Other senators chimed in, some supporting the modernization efforts, others questioning whether the military was losing something vital in its push to change. Sarah was packing her office. When Harrison appeared, he looked older, tired. "Hell of a thing you've stirred up," he said. "I didn't stir anything, sir. I was ready to go quietly. Were you?" He sat in the chair across from her desk, the first time he'd ever done so. "You know, I remember when you first arrived here, Major Mitchell, fresh from Afghanistan. You terrified half the staff. I had standards. You had impossible standards. But damn if you didn't meet them yourself." He rubbed his face. "The order's been rescinded." Sarah's hands stilled on the box he was packing. "Sir Sectef called personally. Apparently, pushing out decorated female officers doesn't play well in the current political climate. You're staying in trauma. In fact," he pulled out an envelope, "you're being promoted. Brigadier General Mitchell has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Sarah stared at the envelope. "This feels like a publicity stunt." "Maybe it is, but it's also overdue." Harrison stood. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I let bureaucrats convince me that new was better than good, that soft was better than strong. I forgot what military medicine is really about." "And what's that, sir?" "Saving lives when death seems certain. Being hard enough to make the impossible decisions. You've always known that." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. This hospital needs you. The army needs you." After he left, Sarah sat alone in her half-packed office. The promotion felt hollow after everything that had happened. But then she thought about Hayes, about the young nurses who still needed training, about the soldiers who had come through those doors needing someone who wouldn't give up on them. She began unpacking. 6 months later, Brigadier General Sarah Mitchell stood before a class of new combat nurses. The training program had been restructured, still rigorous, still demanding, but now with regular feedback sessions and mentorship components. Sarah had learned to temper her sharp edges without dulling her standards. "You're going to see things that will break your heart," she told them. "You're going to lose patience. You're going to question whether you're strong enough. On those days, remember this. We don't do this job because it's easy. We do it because someone has to. Someone has to stand between our soldiers and death." In the back of the room, Lieutenant Hayes, now Captain Hayes, smiled. The Ice Queen had thawed, just a little, but the warrior remained. "Some of you have heard I'm a hard ass," Sarah continued, and a few nervous laughs rippled through the room. "It's true. I'll push you harder than you've ever been pushed. But I'll also stand by you, fight for you, and make sure that when you're in the field and a soldier's life depends on you, you'll be ready." She thought about her bloodied knuckles, about the mirror that had reflected her broken pieces. She thought about the voices calling her a fossil, the committees ready to discard her like outdated equipment. But mostly, she thought about Thompson learning to dance at his wedding in a wheelchair, about Park becoming a motivational speaker, about the 1,000 other lives that continued because someone had refused to give up. "Welcome to combat nursing," Sarah said. "Let's begin." Later, walking through the hospital corridor she'd nearly been banished from, Sarah passed the bathroom with a replaced mirror. She caught her reflection older, yes, lined with years of service and struggle, but not broken, not anymore. Her phone buzzed. A message from Thompson. "Saw the news about your promotion. Still saving lives, Colonel. Sarah, keep fighting the good fight." Sarah smiled and kept walking. There were rounds to make, lives to save, and young nurses to train. The military might have tried to break her wings, but Sarah Mitchell had learned something important. Sometimes you had to break before you could soar.